BBC One Match of the Day has FA Cup semi-final action at 10 o'clock. Then Lee Marvin heads an all-star cast in a Dirty Dozen at 10:50. And finally at 1:10, Peter Falk is the Cheap Detective. And now on BBC One, the 9 o'clock news and campaign report with Michael Buerk.
The election has become a personal battle over who will best defend Britain in Europe. John Major's called Tony Blair slippery. Mr. Blair's called Mr. Major's leadership pitiful. And French fishermen have turned hundreds of British ferry passengers back from their channel ports. Good evening. The main party leaders have each been trying to turn the issue of Europe to their advantage in the wake of the controversy caused by the European Commission President Jacques Santer yesterday. Mr. Santer was unrepentant today about calling Eurosceptics doom merchants. John Major said his speech underlined the dangers ahead in Europe. Tony Blair insisted he was the best person to stand up for Britain's interests. And Paddy Ashdown ridiculed the others for turning Mr. Santer into a Hermann Goering figure, planning to blitz Britain. Our political correspondent Huw Edwards reports.
It was John Major 2 weeks ago. Today it was Tony Blair's turn.
Hello there, good afternoon, Luton.
Labour's big hunting ground is the southeast of England. These are the voters of Middle England that Tony Blair has courted for so long.
Let me tell you, 18 years is long enough.
It's a confident show, but Mr. Blair's team now has one great fear: that thousands of apparently undecided voters will in the coming days come off the fence onto John Major's side, prompted in part by Tory claims that Mr. Blair would give away too many powers at the European summit in Amsterdam.
What we will determine as the test for Britain in Amsterdam and elsewhere is what is in British national interest. That is the sole test. But it is in Britain's national interest to start leading and succeeding in Europe, not as they have been under John Major and his divided, hopeless, pitiful party, failing on every occasion.
The Blair-Major exchanges have now developed a much harder edge, with Mr. Blair upping the stakes today by asking voters to make a direct, personal choice between him and John Major.
John Major, the man who appointed Jacques Santer, who gave us the beef war and the fiasco over BSE, who can't even keep his own political party together in the course of an election campaign, or me. Now, who do you want to represent you? The man who failed, or the man who can succeed?
And the man who's supposed to have failed was on the stump in Scotland today. Out came the soapbox again, well, the modern equivalent anyway, to answer the critics.
This is your last champion. You're funny.
It's good to see old Labour still around, isn't it?
And despite the bumpy ride, he's feeling good, say colleagues, because he thinks the debate about our future in Europe is now going his way and not Mr. Blair's.
I've heard nothing unequivocal from him. All I hear is seeing him slippery and changing his position on European policy almost by the hour. And I think it's absolutely clear from listening to him, from listening to Gordon Brown and from listening to others, that the Labour position on Europe is not one that marches remotely with the instincts of the British nation.
And reflecting the growing contest to sound as Eurosceptical as possible, even the proudly pro-European Liberal Democrats tried to inject a note of caution into their message.
I am not in favour of a European superstate. I am in favour, and the Liberal Democrats are in favour, of a decentralised, democratic and diverse Europe. Above all, a Europe built on the will of the people, not on the manipulation of politicians.
No regrets today from Jacques Santer, the European Commission President, whose attack on Eurosceptics yesterday united the Tories, Labour and Lib Dems in condemnation. And yet there are some significant differences in their approaches to the big questions. The planned single currency, called the euro, is supposed to start in 1999, and the talks have been underway for some time. The Tories say they're hostile, but they'd stay in the talks and decide whether to join at the last moment. This is what's called the wait-and-see policy. They'd also hold a referendum before signing up. Labour's policy is also to wait and see and to hold a referendum. But the Lib Dems say they're in favour, though they too would hold a referendum. The other big question is the national veto, Britain's right in some areas to block those ideas it doesn't like. Defence and foreign affairs is one such area, along with justice, immigration, tax policy and changes to the EU's constitution. Laws on fishing, on the other hand, and other areas like transport and the environment cannot be blocked by one country. They're decided by what's called qualified majority voting. Brussels wants this system extended so that decisions can be reached more quickly. But the Tories would change nothing. Labour would keep the veto for foreign policy, defence, taxation and immigration, but would consider a change on regional, social and industrial matters. And the Lib Dems would give up the veto in all areas except the EU's budget and constitution and laws on pay and benefits. But those policy differences, according to the parties themselves, do not bother a majority of voters. What does bother people, on Europe as on other things, is the issue of leadership and trust. That's why the exchanges between Mr Blair and Mr Major will become more pointed, and that's what will decide this election a week on Thursday. Huw Edwards, BBC News, Westminster.
Tony Blair has called on his party to consign the Conservative government to history. In a speech in Hertfordshire tonight, he warned voters that the real danger in this election was a fifth term for the Tories. Mr Blair also spoke of his desire to see a society where citizens had a sense of duty to others. Our political correspondent Jeremy Vine was there.
It's not clear quite what was written on the script Mr Blair was mulling over with his press secretary before tonight's rally, because almost as soon as he arrived at the podium, he departed from it.
I'm going to do this. You're right, you can hear me, can't you?
One aide had said, look, Europe is not doing any of the parties any good. And so there was deliberately barely a mention of the subject, as Mr Blair returned to what he regards as his key themes.
Well, I'm going to tell you this evening what's going to change in Britain if we win that general election. First off, we'll start to rebuild the National Health Service as a decent public service serving the interests of the people of this country.
But when Mr Blair came to helping pensioners, he used the word if before his pledge on VAT on fuel.
If we've got room for a tax cut, let the tax cut be VAT on fuel that helps the pensioners of this country, those people that have been left out by the Conservatives.
But Conservatives were not ignoring that, and they're already saying it means Mr Blair has watered down what was a solid manifesto commitment. When he moved on, he stuck very much to Labour's existing script, focusing heavily on education.
Some people talk about careers, other people talk about jobs. I want everyone to be able to talk about a career. You know, I want everyone to be able to think, I've got prospects.
And then there were promises about what Labour would not deliver.
There's no going back to the trade union laws of the 70s. There's no going back to old tax and spend. There's no going back to the days of state control and nationalisation and all the rest of it.
And then the central message.
I believe in New Labour. For me, New Labour is not some public relations gimmick or some salesman's patter. New Labour is what I believe, because I believe in the Labour Party and its values.
All this wasn't as spontaneous as it might have appeared. In fact, Mr Blair's aides were briefing in advance that he was due to let rip on the stage tonight, perhaps dangerous in the light of his comment on VAT. And for Labour, there are clearly tactical lessons in all of this, having run a well-choreographed, carefully controlled campaign with very few frayed edges. Mr Blair has clearly decided he has simply not been looking passionate enough. Jeremy Vine, BBC News, Stevenage.
The Liberal Democrat leader Paddy Ashdown chose the theme of patriotism for his key speech to a party rally in Eastleigh. He attacked the Conservatives for phony patriotism and accused Labour of designer patriotism. Instead, he offered his vision of the true patriot, dedicated to raising Britain's level of education and skills. Our political editor, Robin Oakley, is in Eastleigh.
Another crowded day for Paddy Ashdown. This one became confrontational as he was tackled in the streets of Southsea by referendum party campaigners.
Why will you not allow the people of this country to have their decision about Europe?
To their obvious surprise, Mr Ashdown pointed out that his party was pledged to a referendum, not just on a single currency, but on any major constitutional change in Europe too.
The referendum party represented in this Parliament and is going to be represented in the next Parliament are the Liberal Democrats. Now there's your answer.
Let me help me.
Action Man has made education the Liberal Democrats' key theme. At Carisbrooke School on the Isle of Wight, he helped to polish their green credentials too, helping pupils on an environmental project.
I'm hopeless at this.
At Admiral Lord Nelson School in Portsmouth, he turned his hand to more domestic skills. Then it was on to a Sailing for the Disabled project in Hamble. The quest for votes is unrelenting, but where are they coming from?
Some from Labour, people who appreciate that we do need to invest in education and health and support costed, specific and targeted policies to do that. But interestingly enough now, quite a lot from the Conservatives, decent One Nation Conservatives, used to honesty in politics, value the public services.
Paddy Ashdown's determination to keep his party saying sharp things about bread and butter issues, like health and education, instead of focusing on its own enthusiasms like voting reform, has paid off with measurable progress in the polls. The question now is whether they can hold on to that advance or whether it will slip away in the last week, like it did in 1992.
When it is so evident...
Tonight at an Eastleigh rally, Mr. Ashdown offered a redefinition of true patriotism.
Well, I reject, and Liberal Democrats reject, the phony patriotism of Conservative central office. And I reject, too, the sort of designer patriotism that we have seen from the Labour Party over the last week or so. You know, I'm always rather suspicious of people who are so unself-confident that they have to rely on symbols, on bulldogs and banners.
He himself invoked the image of Churchill.
Well, if the true patriots in the 1930s saw the need for Britain to rearm, the true patriot in the 1990s sees now the need for Britain to re-educate.
The Liberal Democrats believe they've never had a sharper message, but nervous of the way that Europe is playing, their worry is whether their role will carry them to May the 1st. Robin Oakley, BBC News, Eastleigh.
And that's the news from the campaign trail for the moment. There'll be more later in the programme, including the latest findings about whether the Tories are catching up in the opinion polls. But now for the rest of the day's news. Hundreds of British ferry passengers have been turned back by all the main parties. We begin tonight with Dafydd Wigley, president of the Welsh Nationalist Party, Plaid Cymru. He insists the progressive policies needed in Wales can only be delivered by its own parliament. I began by asking Mr Wigley how Plaid Cymru would pay for independence.
We, of course, would have to raise our own taxes in order to pay for our own services. At the moment, we pay for everything that we get, and the net borrowing requirement per head of population in Wales on the basis of our policies is no greater than that of the UK as a whole.
Well, Labour's suggesting a devolved parliament that wouldn't have tax-raising powers, but a referendum first. It goes far short of what you want, of course, yes, Mr Wigley, but will you be recommending to your people that they vote yes or no in that referendum?
Well, our problem is that the Labour Party only published 4 paragraphs in their manifesto for Wales on the details of their assembly. We want to have the full white paper available before we can give an indication, but more important even than that, we want to make sure that the referendum gives a multi-option to the people of Wales to vote for the 4 possibilities: status quo, assembly with no powers as Labour is promising, a lawmaking parliament as they're offering Scotland, and indeed full self-government in Europe as Plaid wants.
But the basic shape of what Labour is planning is clear. The basic shape's there. You're not going to get 4 questions on the referendum. If it is just a simple yes or no for what Labour want to see, will you be recommending yes or no?
Well, we'll come to a decision on that when they tell us what we're going to get. We will get a white paper apparently after the general election, not before. We regret very much that Labour hasn't given us the details in Wales of what they're offering. As soon as we have those details, we'll be in a position to come to a judgment.
You seem to be the only party left that's not ashamed to call itself left-wing and socialist, to believe in old-fashioned interventionist policies that seem to have been rejected in elections here and elsewhere for a decade or more. Do you not feel that history has passed you by?
No, we adhere to the principles of community socialism. We're not wanting to renationalise everything. What we want to make sure is that the basic services like health and education are available totally in the public service, and that we are prepared to pay for this by way of the taxation system. We believe that the income tax should be back up at 25 pence to the pound, and the top rate up another 10 pence in order to fund this. That is because the needs of Wales, in terms of the community, dictate those policies, and that has been a common thread down this century through all 3 parties, Liberals, Labour and Plaid Cymru, up to now. And it's only now that we're seeing the Labour Party becoming what is in fact another Tory party, and the people of Wales are being deprived of that option.
Dafydd Wigley of Plaid Cymru. Coming up on tonight's 9 o'clock news, Peter Sissons on the electoral battle for the suburbs of the South East. But first over to Anne Perkins at our Westminster campaign desk for her nightly election roundup.
Evening, Michael. In Northern Ireland, one of the most closely watched contests will be in rural Mid-Ulster, a seat where there's a Catholic majority, but which has returned the unionist William McCrea since 1983. He gets in because the Catholic vote split between the SDLP and Sinn Féin.
Make your mark and make it well. Make your mark and make it tell. Make it solid.
William McCrea is the lone unionist candidate in Mid-Ulster. If any other stood, the seat would go to a nationalist. He says he's quietly confident of winning again. In an area with a Catholic majority, he's Protestant and proud. A quick hymn for the political faithful.
My soul was in sin, my heart it was in shame. I didn't know Jesus.
With a Protestant community that feels beleaguered, it's almost a crusade to keep the seat.
I can live along with nationalists. I believe they have the right to their beliefs. They have the right to their beliefs for United Ireland. As I and the unionist community have a right for our belief to remain part of the United Kingdom. But no one has the right to take a gun or a bomb or a bullet to force their beliefs.
That's aimed at Republicans, and the Sinn Féin candidate, Martin McGuinness, is a leader of the party most identified with its hardest line.
Well, there's going to be a new British government, and that provides a new opportunity for a peace settlement.
That he's standing underlines Sinn Féin's belief that they can take the seat. They topped the poll in last year's election that was part of the multi-party talks package, narrowly ahead of the SDLP.
The SDLP realise that they actually can't win the seat, and what they're simply doing is staying in there just to maintain their vote. What we are saying to them is, and we are appealing over the heads of the SDLP leadership to the ordinary SDLP voter, to take this opportunity to remove McCrea, but also to rebuild the peace process.
The SDLP believes Martin McGuinness can't win, and that its candidate, Denis Haughey, only needs to pick up a quarter of the non-voters to take the seat. His party ruled out an electoral pact with Sinn Féin anywhere.
How could we enter into an arrangement with Sinn Féin in circumstances where the IRS shoot women in the back?
The SDLP also wants to get rid of the sitting unionist and says it represents an alternative to two extremes.
People are sick and tired of the extremes that we've seen in our society. They're sick of the violence, they're sick of extremism, and they want proper representation, they want jobs, and they want peace. With the SDLP, they know that that is what they're voting for.
Mid-Ulster is the cockpit of this election in Northern Ireland. Its theme, vote for the Protestant or Catholic who can win. Dennis Murray, BBC News, Mid-Ulster.
And there are a total of 6 candidates standing in the Mid-Ulster seat. Here they are. Both the BBC and ITV have refused to show a party election broadcast by the anti-abortion Pro-Life Alliance. They say it breaches guidelines on taste and decency. The Pro-Life Alliance's proposed broadcast contained footage of aborted fetuses. The alliance said it was considering legal action against the broadcasters. 2 opinion polls tomorrow appear to contradict each other. ICM in The Guardian isn't out yet, but is expected to give cheer to the Tories by cutting Labour's lead to single figures. ICM put Labour 14 points ahead a week ago. But the latest update of Gallup's daily poll for tomorrow's Daily Telegraph shows a 21-point Labour lead, unchanged since a similar survey last Tuesday. Labour remain on 51, the Conservatives stay on 30, and the Liberal Democrats on 12. This survey was carried out between Sunday and today. The margin of error for all these polls is plus or minus 3%. Paddy Ashdown may have covered thousands of miles during the campaign, meeting people from all walks of life and talking about them, but the Liberal Democrats have another wandering star, so far unsung. The former Labour Cabinet Minister, then SDP luminary Shirley Williams, now Baroness Williams of the Liberal Democrats, has almost matched the mileage of her party leader. John Pienaar caught up with her.
Another drafty platform, another target seat. Not much star treatment for Shirley Williams these days, and the last time she was in the cabinet, the local candidate here was in short trousers. 2 parties later, and she's watched Labour dump the policies which persuaded her to walk out in the first place. Now she's touring the country for the Lib Dems, and today she was meeting university students. Wherever she goes, she's sticking to an older style of politics and electioneering.
It's been hijacked to a great extent, forgive me for saying so, BBC, by television and the media. The number of interactions between electors and people standing for Parliament is much reduced compared to the past.
There was time to talk to these students, more than you'd expect in the age of photo opportunities and sound bites. On went the message as time went by. The audience changed, but the message stayed the same. Only the Lib Dems were offering radical policy. She believes Labour's given up its ideals and bought into an American style of campaigning without principle.
I think it would be an absolute tragedy if the emptiness of the Clinton administration in its battle with the Republicans was translated to Britain and we had an empty political process where the only thing that matters was how effective the spin doctors could be and where the real ideals and principles of politics are lost.
So you'd like to help the Labour Party rediscover its soul?
Yes, of course I would, but only by being a Liberal Democrat. That's really nice of you. I'm Shirley Williams.
Yeah, I recognise you. That means campaigning the old-fashioned way, making promises on tax and spending the other parties won't. The Lib Dems are hoping for a share of influence after the election. Some believe honesty is a virtue and virtue is its own reward. If the polls are right, they may have to settle for that. John Pienaar, BBC News, campaigning with Lady Williams in Hampshire.
And that's it from us tonight, Michael. Back to you.
Thanks, Anne. During the campaign, we've been reporting on the issues up and down the country. Tonight we're in the southeast, the battleground that many see as the key to Labour's chances of taking power. It's the most populous and wealthiest region of the country, largely because financial services account for nearly a third of local income. Average earnings at £407 a week are comfortably above the national average, although men tend to earn much more than women, and the unemployment rate is below the national average at 5.6%. Homeowners, however, did suffer in the recession. The South East still has the highest number of people with negative equity. And the region's increasing links with the continent means that Europe could be an important issue for many people. Peter Sissons is in Gravesend, in one of the area's key marginal seats.
Thank you, Michael, and good evening from Gravesend, at the heart of the Gravesham constituency, one of the 7 marginal seats in the South East that Labour must take if it is to win a bare overall majority at Westminster. As we've said before, however many votes Labour may pile up in Bootle or the Tories in Tunbridge Wells, it profits them nothing unless they can persuade people in finely balanced seats like this. So has Labour done enough to break through in those southeast seats for which so much old Labour baggage has been thrown overboard? Our political correspondent Emma Udwin has travelled across the region to find out what's on the minds of the voters.
Gatwick Airport in Sussex. 24 million travellers passed through here last year, bound for the sun or on business.
British Airways would like to thank you for using the North Terminal.
The early 90s recession hit even the prosperous southeast, and the airport's emerging from a few lean years. Holidays are a good guide to how much spare cash people have to spend. And now in nearby Crawley, bookings are up, a sign that as we approach the election, confidence is returning.
Our business is telling us that since Christmas we've booked 25% more passengers non-inclusive holidays than we did at the same time last year, and even more importantly they are spending an average of 10% more per person on their holiday.
Stretching from the resorts of the south coast, this is the most middle class of Britain's regions. The green and pleasant lands of the home counties owe much of their affluence to agriculture, though many here work in business and financial services. Here in the southeast, owner occupation is high and earnings above average. The loyalty of towns like Crawley has been crucial to Tory success since 1979. Now, Labour must win in seats like this to have a chance of power. In the 80s, a north-south divide meant, broadly speaking, affluent Tory voters in the south and Labour support in the poorer north. During the recession, some of those differences were ironed out, but now jobs and house prices are rising much more sharply here in the southeast, and it seems a north-south prosperity gap is opening up again. How that'll affect votes here in the southeast depends on who people now trust to run the economy. This spring, the housing market in Crawley is improving rapidly, but confidence in the traditional party of home ownership has taken a battering. Memory of the recession is kept alive by the many still suffering negative equity, and some habitual Tory voters are now sizing up the other options.
Well, I feel with my industry, I think certainly the Conservatives have hurt the housing market very badly over the years. I don't feel that they've done maybe as much as they could have done, and I think really a change would now be quite a good thing for the property market.
This is commuter land, where many take the early train up to London. On the platform there are grumbles about rail privatisation, but the key concern revealed in our straw poll is job insecurity. Professionals like these had never tasted unemployment before the recession. Many will forgive the government, but not all.
I think everybody's more concerned about employment in general. There seems to be a big shift now towards contract work, and people are feeling more uneasy in themselves.
I think the pain that we've suffered over recent years has been necessary, and it seems to have produced the results.
A lot of people of our age will stick with the Conservatives, but I think it's the younger voter that might get the Labour in.
It's also rush hour at Waterloo International, London's new gateway to Paris and Brussels. First stop on the Eurostar route will be Ashford in Kent. Conventional wisdom has it that voters are much less concerned about Europe than politicians. But where new links to the continent are boosting jobs and business, Europe is on people's minds. Ashford's Black Hawk company, which manufactures high-tech equipment for the motor repair industry, owes more than a third of its trade to Europe. In this plant, it matters whether the UK will join the single currency.
Once the rest of the European countries form a central rate, then we may get left behind, if you like, in terms of selling our product into the market.
And staff here defy opinion polls which suggest Europe is not a voting issue. What's the most important thing that will affect your vote?
Europe, I think. It'll be, I personally think we should stay out of it.
Well, I'm looking for a government which will take a greater party in Europe, which will make us the centre of Europe rather than the fringes.
As the southeast booms, people here are deciding who will best safeguard their prosperity, at home and abroad. Traditional confidence in the Conservatives has been shaken. What's not clear is whether voters are yet ready to trust the alternatives.
Emma Udwin reporting. Many would say that it's the Conservatives' domination of the southeast which has been the key to their success in general elections since 1979. After boundary changes are taken into account, the region outside London has 117 seats. Of these, 112 are held by the Tories. Labour has just 5, including 2 new constituencies. The Liberal Democrats are calculated to have no seats at all, although they won 2 in by-elections during the last Parliament. One of the Conservative seats is this, Gravesham. Now, Gravesham is special because in every general election since the war, bar one, whoever has won Gravesham has formed the government. One of the few Tory marginals in Kent, it needs a swing of just over 4.5% to fall to Labour. I've spent the day in the constituency. 80% of Gravesham is the historic Thames estuary port of Gravesend, still London's gateway to the continent. Fewer ships now than before, but the volume of goods as high as ever. In the days of sail, you could get from the sea on one tide, but it took you a second tide to get you as far as, say, Westminster. And so it is with the constituency. Get past Gravesend on the political tide, and you're there. So what are the issues that concern the people on the streets of the town? And for a region from where it's now easier to travel to France than to Birmingham, what interest is there in the burning national issue, Europe?
I'm not really interested in Europe at all, actually. I'm only sort of interested in the National Health Service and pensions for my mother.
I would like to remain as British rather than as part of the European state. I don't think we should have a European currency.
A sentiment that convinces the Conservative candidate Jakes Arnold, canvassing in one of Gravesham's affluent commuter villages, that his tough Eurosceptic stance is a winner.
And I mean, we won the war, but they're going to take over us without, you know, sort of, it's like taking us over without bloodshed.
Yeah.
I think it's terrible.
We've been doing survey canvassing since the summer of last year, and 80% of people have been against a single European currency from that, and so that has given him the courage of his convictions to put that in his election address.
Single currency or no, Gravesham will soon be closer to Europe than ever. Nearby, Europe's biggest shopping centre is being built at Bluewater, with a direct high-speed rail link to the continent. Town centre shopkeepers have told the Labour candidate Chris Pond of their fear for their future trade rather than the currency in which it may be conducted.
We've talked to a lot of people, but they seem to be happy with the fact that the Labour Party have said that there'll be a referendum, and I think what they really want to see is a strong voice in Europe.
The Liberal Democrats, with their candidate Marilyn Canny, are still trying to make Gravesham a three-way marginal and see local issues as their best hope.
I mean, this A2 here is a perfect example of too much traffic leading to poor air quality for local residents, and I think they're now more concerned about the quality of their education, the quality of their health service, not just about the pound in their wallets.
Inside this multifaceted constituency, like a Russian doll, exists a ward, and inside that, a single road that is said to house the people who typify the voters who will decide the election for John Major or Tony Blair.
We're just ordinary people, and I think, like quite a number of people, so far we haven't made up our mind as to which way we're going to vote.
Ordinary and so far undecided, but in the marginal constituencies of England, the people with the result of the general election in their hands. And there are 6 candidates standing in Gravesham. 2 final thoughts. In the marginals of the East Midlands 2 weeks ago, it was difficult to find voters who rated Europe as an election issue. That was not the case in this southeast marginal. But in both regions, I found party professionals agreeing about one thing, that the bigger leads in the opinion polls overstate Labour's position. Private polling and canvassing in the main parties appears to be telling them to expect a closer result than some of the more expansive predictions. Who's right? We'll know a week on Friday. Back now to Michael Buerk in London.
Peter, thanks. The main election news tonight, the parties are fighting for the high ground on the issue of Europe. And some breaking news, security forces have stormed the Japanese embassy in the Peruvian capital Lima, where 72 people have been held hostage by Marxist guerrillas. These are pictures that have been coming in since we've been on the air. The first sign that anything was happening there was some smoke on the roof, then some firing, and there's no word yet of any casualties, but we have seen at least one of the hostages coming out of the embassy compound, apparently having been shot in the leg. There was the smoke coming from the roof of the embassy building that first showed a sign that anything was happening. People around saw about 15 troops, apparently troops, wearing ski masks and in military fatigues, carrying rifles, get into the compound, and then the firing began. Well, those pictures were recorded since we've been on the air. I'm joined now by our South American correspondent, Michael VOSS, who's in Peru. Michael, these are the pictures live now from Lima. What can you see that's happening?
Well, I mean, it's the troops appear to have pretty much control of sections of the Japanese ambassador's residence. The first we knew that something was happening was 3 loud explosions in a row just before about 20 minutes ago. There is smoke coming out from the roof. I've been watching hostages being released from the roof. The troops have controlled an area, and the hostages have been crawling out on their hands and knees down some stairs to safety. But the battle is still going on. There are troops in the ground, on the roof, more are arriving. And I have seen one person, I don't know whether it's a military, a hostage, or one of the captors, being taken out on a stretcher, and an ambulance was coming through.
But as yet, there's no really clear idea of whether there have been many casualties.
No, there really aren't. I mean, I've seen one person shot in the leg. I believe it was a hostage. I'm now seeing the second casualty on a stretcher. This one appears to be a military personnel as we speak, being taken out. But there have not. There's no signs of large numbers of bodies yet, and it's very difficult to count how many of the hostages have actually been released so far. Although, as I say, I have seen them crawling to safety, being conducted out by the troops.
Michael, this siege has been going on for so long, so many months, that we've almost lost track of how it started and what it's all about.
It started just over 4 months ago when a group of MRTA rebels stormed a diplomatic cocktail party at the Japanese ambassador's residence. At the time, they took 500 people, diplomats and ambassadors from all over the world. They've let all but 72 out, key Peruvians and Japanese businessmen mainly, demanding the release of about 450 of their jailed comrades in Peru, something which the Peruvian government was never going to give in on. President Fujimori made it clear from the beginning he would never give in on that. They've been negotiating, they've been talking about compromises. Obviously, the government has decided that a compromise wasn't going to happen, and as of the weekend, he changed his interior minister and police chief. And I know that the troops were put on alert and confined to barracks last night, and today's action appears to be the work of the new interior minister.
So there were some, actually we're seeing the pictures now of the troops outside in the compound there, Michael. They appear, from what we can see from these live pictures, to be more or less in control of the compound. Is that the way you see it there?
It appears that they are in control, and in fact the pictures, as you say, that we're seeing now, they're looking slightly more relaxed. The troops by the front door of the compound are slightly more relaxed. They're not trying to storm in there. They're standing around talking at the moment. It appears certainly that phase one of this appears to have been completed.
So it looks as though after 4 months the Peruvian siege is over. Michael Voss, thank you very much indeed. And that's the news tonight. Newsnights on BBC Two at 10:35. But that's all from the 9 o'clock news. Goodbye.